Hello everybody and welcome to another incredible episode of History of the Marvel Universe. This channel is sponsored in part by Patreon supporters. If you would like to contribute and vote in monthly polls that help decide what topics get covered on the channel, then you can sign up for an amount of your choosing over at patreon.com/MaryMarvelate. The link is in the description below along with other places you can find me. This week we are spotlighting the history of the Incredible Hulk's perennial love interest Betty Ross, and some of the weird transformations she's had over the years. We've already discussed her family history when we talked about her father, Air Force General Thunderbolt Ross, but to briefly recap, as a young girl, Betty attempted to appease her father who wanted a son to carry on their military tradition. However, she failed to gain his approval and ultimately stopped trying, abandoning this tomboyish facade. When Betty was around 12 or 13 years old, her mother, Karen Lee Ross, developed terminal cancer and passed away. After that, Betty followed her father everywhere and tried to stay close to him, but he was always emotionally distant and ultimately sent her off to boarding school. After graduating, an adult Betty Ross reunited with the general, joining him on the Los Diablos missile base in New Mexico, otherwise known simply as Desert Base. It was there that she met Dr. Robert Bruce Banner, head of the base's Gamma Bomb project, and she found herself drawn to Bruce's calm demeanor, intelligence, and sensitivity. Of course, their budding relationship would be one marred by tragedy ever since an incident during the testing of the bomb resulted in Bruce Banner's transformation into the gamma-powered superhuman known as the Incredible Hulk. Wanting his daughter to marry a military man, Thunderbolt Ross tried to set Betty up with Major Glenn Talbot with little success. While Talbot fell for Betty, she was still in love with Bruce even after his dual identity was publicly exposed. Later, when Bruce gained control over his transformations, the two got engaged. However, the wedding was interrupted by a villain named the Leader, who forcibly transformed Banner back into a savage Hulk. This and further incidents pushed Betty to the verge of a nervous breakdown, and she was brought to a private hospital to recover. It was while she was there that the villainous Sandman forced the staff to perform a complete blood transfusion between him and Betty, an incident which we discussed in more detail on the channel before, but resulted in Betty being transformed into an immobile glass statue. She was ultimately restored to life by Dr. Leonard Samson's Cathexis-Ray in the first recorded usage of that device. Samson also used this machine to endow himself with superhuman strength and subsequently attempted to romance Betty, although their relationship never really went anywhere as she still pined for Bruce. But in the midst of this, Banner became romantically involved with someone else, a green-skinned woman from the microverse named Jarella. Betty learned of this when she and Talbot went to recover Banner after the Hulk's encounter with Havoc and Polaris. Betty held Bruce as he regained consciousness, but the name on his lips as he began to speak was Jarella. Eventually, during a period when Banner was thought to be dead, Betty and Talbot got married. However, not long afterwards, Thunderbolt Ross was captured by a Russian agent known as the Gremlin. Glenn Talbot participated in the mission to rescue him, and while Ross made it home safe, Talbot did not. When General Ross told Betty what happened, she blamed her father for her husband's death and stormed off. You see, Glenn left for this mission almost immediately after his honeymoon, to the point where Betty never even had a chance to cook for him, let alone begin building a life together. She once again suffered a nervous breakdown, but this one was much more intense than the previous incident. Bruce attempted to comfort her, but Betty snapped and lashed out at him until she actually caused him to transform into the Hulk, who then fled. Meanwhile, MODOK decided to take advantage of Betty's delicate condition and mentally programmed her to leave her hospital room the following evening and make her way to a nearby rocket, which then took her to an AIM facility where the mad genius was waiting. Oh, we've talked about MODOK on the channel before, but if you're new here, he's the insane bio-enhanced leader of Advanced Idea Mechanics, a subversive organization made up entirely of mad scientists. Seeking to use her against the Hulk, MODOK used a device of his own design to bombard Betty with gamma radiation, transforming her into a monstrous green-feathered creature he dubbed the Harpy. Receiving an even greater dose of gamma than the one that initially created the Hulk, the Harpy was less humanoid than most gamma mutates, possessing massive bird-like wings and talons. She also had the ability to fire powerful beams of energy from her fingertips, which she referred to as her Harpy Hellbolts. MODOK sent his creation to attack the Hulk, and the Harpy even gained the upper hand in the ensuing battle. However, this conflict was interrupted by another peculiar creature, the Bybeast. Despite its strange appearance, the Bybeast was actually an android created by the Bird People, a winged humanoid race also known as the Avians. Without getting too sidetracked, the Bird People were originally a faction of the Inhumans, themselves a subspecies of humanity created by the alien Kree. Sometime around 500 BC, a winged inhuman named Kylus demanded that he and his flying faction not be forced to live on the ground, and so the inhuman king of the time, Nestor, ordered the construction of a floating city called the Eyrie. Kylus became the ruler of this city, also known as Sky Island, but his sense of supremacy and desire to secede from inhuman society led him to horrifying extremes. When a Batwing inhuman named Kairos argued that they shouldn't let genetics divide them, Kylus branded him a traitor and led a genocide against all denizens of the Eyrie who did not possess white feathered wings. In response, King Nestor acknowledged the Eyries' succession by cleaving its connection to the inhuman city of Atalan and sending it adrift into the clouds, forcing the surviving Avians to become self-sufficient. It's said that Kylus was a wise ruler in his later years, but he eventually perished after a long reign, and, ashamed of their city's bloody beginnings, subsequent avian rulers elected to keep Sky Island isolated from the rest of mankind, leading to their population's eventual decline. There was an incident in 1920 in which a plane crashed on Sky Island after being blown off course by a terrible storm. The sole survivor was an infant human who was then adopted by the avian royal family and grew up to become a World War II-era hero known as the Red Raven. He later left the island after preventing the Bird People from launching an ill-advised attack on humanity by placing the warrior class into suspended animation and separating the avian military facility from Sky Island, allowing it to sink into the Atlantic Ocean. And in the years that followed, the remaining Bird People slowly died out. Aware that their time was at an end, the last remaining avians created a peculiar pair of androids called the Bybeasts, named as such because each one possessed two skulls, with each skull containing an artificial brain with its own individual intelligence. The top skull was programmed with comprehensive knowledge of avian warfare, while the bottom skull was endowed with cultural knowledge. Only one of the two Bybeasts was activated while the other remained in stasis to also absorb the scientific knowledge of the Bird People. The waking Bybeast remained on Sky Island after the final avians perished, and loneliness began to set in. I will note that at least one avian did survive and escape to the surface, a rogue scientist named Condor, who made a career for himself as a D-list supervillain. But getting back to the story at hand, when the conflict between the Hulk and the Harpy brought them into the sky, the pair were noticed by the Bybeast, who used avian technology to summon a whirlwind that brought the two gamma mutates to Sky Island. There, the Harpy attacked the Bybeast, who defeated and imprisoned her, while the thin air at that altitude caused the Hulk to revert to human form. The Bybeast convinced Banner to repair the avian machinery that had begun to break down from lack of maintenance, and Bruce agreed provided that the Harpy be sedated and turned over to his care. Banner then took the opportunity to use avian technology in an attempt to cure Betty. He briefly clashed with the Bybeast again when the eccentric android accused him of treachery. However, this was interrupted when MODOK tracked them all there and tried to claim Sky Island for himself and AIM. In the confusion, Banner managed to slip away with the Harpy, and the two narrowly escaped, with Harpy reverting back to Betty Ross as a delayed result of the treatment. Meanwhile, the Bybeast was critically wounded by MODOK and, not wishing for the avian city to be taken over by AIM, opted to destroy the entire floating island. While this Bybeast's physical body was destroyed, it succeeded in transferring its conscious memories into its sleeping counterpart, whose sealed biocapsule fell into the ocean following the destruction of Sky Island. Bruce and Betty also fell from the crumbling city, but Banner was able to transform into the Hulk and protect Betty from the impact by absorbing the brunt of the landing. The pair found themselves on a small island where they encountered a group of alien monstrosities, but to my knowledge the origins of these entities has never been elaborated on, aside from the fact that they had been sequestered on that island for so long that they themselves didn't even know why they were there. In any event, these beasts were ultimately defeated by the Hulk, and Betty was soon found and recovered by an Air Force search party. She reunited with her father and tried to bury the hatchet, but of course there would still be further difficulties between them. Eventually her husband, Glenn Talbot, seemingly turned up alive, but it was later discovered that this was actually a Russian agent who'd impersonated Talbot as part of a plot to assassinate the president. The real Talbot was later rescued by General Ross and S.H.I.E.L.D. agent Clay Quartermain, and while he was rendered catatonic in the escape, he was later revived thanks to the combined efforts of Doc Samson and Bruce Banner. Despite the happy reunion, it wasn't long before Betty realized that she didn't actually love Glenn, and the two later divorced. Accepting that she was still in love with Bruce, Betty returned to his side, and a broken-hearted Talbot later lost his life in an ill-fated attack on the Hulk. Betty later had another falling out with her father, accusing him of treason when he conspired with MODOK in an attempt to defeat the Hulk by unleashing another Gamma mutate, the Abomination. Later, after the Hulk was banished to the extra-dimensional crossroads by Doctor Strange, Betty briefly dated another man, Ramon Morales, but things ultimately didn't work out between them. When Bruce returned, Betty reunited with him to find that Doc Samson had separated Banner and the Hulk into two unique entities. Following this, Bruce recruited his own team of Hulkbusters to oppose a now mindlessly destructive Hulk. Betty joined him in New Mexico's Gamma base to keep an eye on things and help in his recovery following his separation from the Hulk, and while they were there, Bruce asked her once again to marry him. This time the ceremony was interrupted by Thunderbolt Ross, who tried to stop the wedding at gunpoint, but Betty stood up to her father, forcing him to stand down, and in the end Bruce and Betty became husband and wife. Before long, however, it became evident that the process which separated Bruce from the Hulk would soon be fatal for both of them. Banner was willing to die if it meant ridding the world of the Hulk, but Betty refused to sacrifice him and used their mutual friend and ally, Rick Jones, to contact the Avengers for help. Now, we've discussed the exact circumstances of what happened next elsewhere on the channel, notably in my video on Doc Samson, but the end result is that Bruce and the Hulk not only re-merged, but reverted back to their original Grey Hulk form, in which he was more intelligent than the savage Green Hulk, but was still more churlish than Bruce and only transformed at night. There was subsequently an incident in which the Gamma base was attacked by a parasitic mutant named Nevermind, but General Ross sacrificed his own life to stop it, saving Betty in the process. In the wake of this, Ramon Morales tried to re-establish contact with Betty by falsely claiming to be her husband, and while she was initially hesitant, she did agree to meet with him after growing frustrated with Bruce's willingness to deal with problems by unleashing the Hulk. She and Ramon talked long into the night as Betty began to question her marriage, and Bruce found the two in a hotel room together the following day, although nothing physical actually happened between them. The married couple briefly reconciled, however, Betty was injured when night fell and Bruce inadvertently transformed into the Grey Hulk while holding her. Betty stayed with Ramon during her recovery, but suffice it to say there was a reason that relationship never worked out, and Betty left him without explanation after realizing that she was pregnant with Bruce's child. After that, she was briefly abducted by the leader, but he released her with the assumption that her return would distract Banner from his schemes. Betty subsequently made peace with the Grey Hulk during one of his more lucid periods and told him about her pregnancy. Not long after that, however, the leader seemingly killed the Hulk when he detonated a gamma bomb that completely destroyed the town of Middleton, Arizona. Betty suffered further heartache when she subsequently lost the baby and tried to find peace by leaving her own life behind and training to become a nun. However, she left the convent when she learned that Bruce was still alive, and the Mother Superior there, being one of Betty's old boarding school teachers, respected her decision. Betty reunited with Bruce and later the Hulk, who was still in his gray form and by this point had spent time operating in Las Vegas under the name Joe Fixit. Betty also met a woman named Marlo Chandler, who had been in a sort of relationship with Joe, but not so much Bruce. Meanwhile, Doc Samson helped Banner attempt to reconcile his various personas, resulting in the emergence of a new Hulk form that was ostensibly an amalgamation of his gray, green, and human selves, dubbed Professor Hulk. This new status quo was initially difficult for Betty as Bruce remained in that state without being able to revert to human form. Soon after that, Banner got involved with a group called the Pantheon, while Betty pensively accepted an invitation to share an apartment with Marlo Chandler in Reno, Nevada. Betty was hesitant at first, but the two women ultimately bonded while sharing stories of the ridiculous things they'd been through. They did end up getting drunk and cutting Betty's hair and dyeing it green, causing her to briefly think she was reverting back to her Harpy form when she woke up with a hangover the next morning. They very quickly changed it to blonde, and she kept that look until it started to grow out again. Marlo Chandler was later murdered by an unstable woman named Jackie Shore, who believed herself to be Rick Jones's biological mother. Betty narrowly avoided a similar fate but succeeded in subduing the deranged attacker, knocking her out with a fire poker. Distraught by the death of her friend, Betty reunited with Bruce once again and accepted his seemingly permanent Hulk-like appearance. Marlo was soon resurrected by the leader as part of another plot, and while she was rescued by the Hulk, she remained catatonic for a time and had to be tended to by Rick and Betty before she finally started to fully recover. Betty later joined Bruce in the Pantheon's headquarters, the Mount, but was later injured when this facility was destroyed during a battle with the Endless Knights, cybernetically enhanced corpses of deceased Pantheon members. She fortunately survived and moved to Florida with Bruce under the false identity of Betty Danner. While there, she was found and attacked by her dead ex-husband's vengeful nephew, Major Matt Talbot, and used as bait for the Hulk. In the ensuing battle, when Talbot made it seem like he'd shot and crippled Betty, Bruce got so angry that it triggered a mental failsafe that physically reverted his body to human form, preventing the savage Hulk from being fully unleashed. Bruce was captured, but Betty, who was actually only stunned by Talbot, then met a group of cyborgs called the Head Shop, who attempted to rescue her husband. However, in the escape, Bruce sustained an injury that left him mentally unstable due to shrapnel becoming embedded in his brain. During a subsequent battle with Thor, the military launched a nuclear warhead at the Hulk, seemingly killing him. Once again thinking her husband was gone, Betty turned to writing and started working on an autobiography to help make sense of her insane life. Sometime after that, her father returned after being resurrected by an alien race called the Trojans. For his daughter's sake, the general took a softer approach in dealing with Banner, who of course was still alive and by this point had reverted to his usual status quo of Bruce Banner and the Green Hulk being two separate personas. In any event, Ross was able to convince Bruce to surrender, and he reunited with Betty once again. However, tragedy soon struck once more when Betty fell ill with lethal radiation poisoning. Banner attempted to save her life and likely would have succeeded if not for the Abomination, who secretly sabotaged her blood transfusion, poisoning her with his own irradiated blood. Betty seemingly died, and her father placed her body into stasis in the hopes that she could one day be resurrected as he had. At one point, it was alleged that she was revived by an enigmatic group called the Team, who surgically modified her appearance and sent her to infiltrate a clandestine organization called Home Base, which was ostensibly under the control of the leader. The supposed Betty did so and subsequently established contact with Banner under the alias Mr. Blue, but it was later suggested that many of the events surrounding Home Base may have been manipulated or outright fabricated by the demon Nightmare. In truth, it seems that Betty remained in stasis until her body was obtained by the Intelligentsia, a group of villains including MODOK and the leader, who also manipulated Doc Samson into helping them, endowing him with a darker, alternate persona. Having already transformed her father into a Red Hulk by using Samson's Cathexis-Ray to drain gamma energy from the Hulk and mix it with cosmic radiation, the leader revived Betty with a similar process, using Banner's cousin Jennifer Walters, the original She-Hulk, as a basis to transform Betty into a Red She-Hulk. The Intelligentsia tested the Red She-Hulk's ferocity and ability to be controlled by pitting her against Walters. The Red She-Hulk seemingly succeeded in killing her green counterpart, although this was actually a robotic duplicate called an LMD that was programmed by the Intelligentsia, much to Betty's frustration. The Intelligentsia subsequently intended on humbling the unruly male Red Hulk by tricking him into assembling a team called Code Red, including the Red She-Hulk, that would then turn against him. We talked more about those events on the video about the Red Hulk himself, so refer to that for more details. Betty didn't know the Red Hulk's true identity during that initial encounter, but later found out when she was sent to kill him and used her energy-absorbing powers to revert him to human form. Upon learning that he was her father, she spared him, and the Intelligentsia's influence over her began to weaken. Betty attempted to reunite with Bruce once again, but was nearly killed when she was stabbed by his half-alien son, Scar, who still believed her to be an enemy. Fortunately, her rage allowed her to transform when Doc Samson arrived on the scene, causing her Hulk form to heal itself. After the fall of the Intelligentsia, Betty remained allies with Bruce, helping him and the other Hulks against a number of threats, but legally their marriage had been annulled and she resisted his attempts to rekindle their relationship. As the Red She-Hulk, Betty had more adventures than we have time to recount here, including some as part of a team of Defenders alongside Doctor Strange, Iron Fist, the Silver Surfer, and more. Later, there was an incident in which Banner suffered a severe brain injury that was then treated with Extremis technology, causing him to develop a new super-intelligent Hulk persona that dubbed itself Doc Green. In this state, he sought to cure every other Gamma mutate on Earth, including the Red She-Hulk, much to Betty's dismay. Doc Green convinced Rick Jones to help and had him slip the cure into Betty's food, permanently depowering her. Now, Banner was later depowered as well, albeit under unrelated circumstances, and subsequently killed. However, this was during a time when it seemed as though anyone who'd ever even been a Gamma mutate was effectively immortal, able to return to life by passing through a metaphysical green door. Banner returned, albeit with a darker alter, often referred to as the Devil Hulk, as the dominant Hulk persona. Betty reunited with Bruce upon learning that he was alive again and was conflicted about seeing him, but she was then killed when the superhuman assassin Bushwhacker tried to shoot Banner but hit her instead. But because of the aforementioned green door allowing Gamma mutates to come back from the dead, Betty was resurrected as an amalgamation of her two previous Gamma forms, becoming a Red Harpy. Of course, there's a lot more to that story as well, but for the full context, you can check out the book The Immortal Hulk, available in its entirety on Marvel Unlimited. They're not paying me to tell you that, I just think that book's pretty good. Maybe we'll cover it in more detail in the future, so let me know in the comments what topics you want to hear more about. In the meantime, thank you so much for watching this video. If you enjoyed it, be sure to leave a like, subscribe to the channel, and share it on your favorite social media. As always, the issues referenced in this video are listed in the description below if you would like to read them for yourself, as well as links to other places you can find me. Let me give a special shout out to all of my Patreon and Ko-fi supporters, Twitch subscribers, and YouTube members who help make the channel possible. By signing up for any ongoing amount on any of these platforms, you'll get your name in these special thanks here, but Patreon is the one that helps determine what topics get covered on the channel via monthly polls. And as I said, if there's anything in particular that you want me to talk about, be sure to let me know in the comments. But that is indeed all I have for you this week, and so until next time, true believers, Excelsior!